Imagine surviving a devastating storm, only to discover that evil forces are lurking, ready to hunt the survivors. This is the story of the Macabre Storm, where a natural calamity turns into a true nightmare. Are you ready to hear about the terror that lurks after the storm? Press play and join us. It was a summer night when the storm approached quickly, announcing its arrival with thunderous roars and fierce winds. The city of Fairview was unprepared for the disaster about to occur. Meteorologists had predicted an ordinary storm, but what hit the city was one of the fiercest storms anyone had ever seen. Emergency sirens echoed, but many residents were caught by surprise, unable to find shelter in time. As the storm raged, houses were destroyed, trees uprooted, and power lines knocked down. The city was plunged into total darkness with only the lightning momentarily illuminating the devastation. Among the residents was David, a 30-year-old man who had just moved to Fairview in search of a peaceful life. He never imagined that his new home would be destroyed just weeks after his arrival. When the storm finally passed, the city was in ruins. David emerged from his makeshift basement shelter to find his neighborhood unrecognizable. Debris was scattered everywhere, and the silence following the storm was unsettling. David began searching for other survivors, finding a few people who, like him, had managed to escape with their lives. He joined a small group of survivors, including Mary, a nurse, John, a teacher, and Lisa, a single mother. Together, they began searching for supplies and trying to understand the extent of the destruction. But as they walked through the devastated streets, they started noticing strange things. Sinister whispers carried by the wind, shadows moving without a light source, and a growing sense that they were being watched. On the first night after the storm, the group set up an improvised camp in a partially destroyed building. They lit a fire to keep warm and to ward off the oppressive darkness. While discussing their plans, Mary noticed a shadowy figure in the distance, watching them. She alerted the others, but when they all looked, the figure had disappeared. However, the feeling of being watched persisted. That night, as everyone tried to sleep, David heard light footsteps and heavy breathing around the camp. He opened his eyes to see shadows moving around the fire and a tall, dark figure approaching him. When David screamed, the figure vanished, but the dread remained. In the following days, the survivors realized they were not alone. Malevolent entities had awakened with the storm, hunting the living with an insatiable hunger. These creatures were not just shadows, but corporeal beings that fed on fear and despair. Each survivor had their own terrifying encounter, and every night the group shrank as more people mysteriously disappeared. John was the first to succumb. While exploring a house for food, he was surrounded by shadows that pulled him into a wall, his screams of terror echoing through the neighborhood. Mary found only his fallen flashlight and bloodstains on the ground. Fear in the group grew, and they began to realize their chances of survival were slim. Desperate for answers, David and Mary began investigating the town's history, trying to discover the origin of the entities. They found an old diary in a ruined library, written by a man who had lived in Fairview over a century ago. The diary spoke of an ancient ritual performed by a sect that believed the storm brought the spirits of the dead. According to the diary, the sect conducted human sacrifices to appease the spirits, but when they were exterminated by the town's residents, a curse was cast on Fairview. Whenever a devastating storm hit the city, the spirits would return seeking vengeance. David and Mary realized that the survivors were being hunted as part of an ancient sacrificial ritual. With the diary's revelations, David and Mary decided they needed to escape Fairview before it was too late. Lisa, who was deeply traumatized by the loss of her young son during the storm, hesitated to leave the town but was convinced to join them. The trio gathered whatever supplies they could and began planning their escape. The night before their escape, the entities became more aggressive. The shadows were denser and the whispers louder. The fear among the survivors was palpable, and Lisa began showing signs of utter despair, muttering about the inevitability of her death. David and Mary tried to calm her, but they knew time was running out. On the night of the escape, an even stronger storm began forming on the horizon. The trio ran through the devastated streets, trying to reach David's car parked on the outskirts of town. As they ran, they were pursued by the entities, which moved faster and with more intensity. The sense of terror was overwhelming, and Lisa, unable to continue, was dragged away by the shadows, her screams cutting through the air. David and Mary managed to reach the car, but it wouldn't start. The entities were closing in, surrounding the vehicle. In desperation, David tried to fix the engine while Mary prayed for a miracle. At the last moment, the car finally started, and they sped down the road, leaving Fairview behind. But the feeling that something was following them persisted. Even after leaving Fairview, David and Mary realized they were not free. The entities had latched onto them like an eternal shadow. Strange accidents and events began happening in their lives, suggesting the curse was still haunting them. Mary started having constant nightmares, and David felt a dark presence in his home every night. One night, David woke up to an intense cold and saw shadows surrounding his bed. Mary had disappeared from his life weeks before, and he knew his fate was sealed. The entities had finally found him, and as he screamed for help, he felt the shadows envelop him, dragging him into eternal darkness. Fairview was abandoned, with the few remaining authorities declaring the town uninhabitable. Stories about the storm's curse spread, but few believed the accounts. Those who survived Fairview knew the truth, but were condemned to eternal silence. The storm's curse continued, ready to awaken again with the next storm. Want a part 2 of this story? Leave it in the comments. If you have a horror story and want to see it published on our channel, send your story.